Today, ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk to you about how to be a more effective salesperson. How to get more of your buyers and sellers to say yes and feel good about it. Would you agree with me if I said to you that there's no commission on a sale you almost make? Well, of course you would. And that's one of the real sad tragedies about real estate, is how many almost opportunities that we convert. So to get the most from the time we're going to be together today, I'm going to ask you to change your thinking about being an effective salesperson. I'm going to ask you to give yourself a checkup from the neck up, as old Zig Ziglar used to say, and change that stinking thinking. See, ladies and gentlemen, to be successful, you must accept the fact that you are a professional salesperson. You're not an order taker. And there's nothing the matter with being a professional salesperson. A lot of people think, well, really, Bill, I'm in the customer service business. Yes, you are. But that means servicing the need of the customer. That buyer who almost bought and that listing you almost sold, well, we didn't service those customers, did we? We didn't satisfy their need. So customer service means helping those buyers and sellers say yes and feeling good about it. See, I believe that professional selling is really two things. It comes down to your ability to be able to determine somebody's need and then to satisfy that need. That's all professional selling is. People think, oh, you're a pushy salesperson. No, there's no pushiness involved. It's two steps. Finding out somebody's need and then satisfying the need. Where's the pushy salesperson in that? I'm talking about being a professional salesperson. See, ladies and gentlemen, buyers want to buy and sellers want to sell. Now, what's the biggest obstacle standing in the way of those buyers buying and those sellers selling? Or any selling process for that matter? Well, it's simple. It's fear. False education that appears real. Well, what is it that the customers have a fear of? What is it that those buyers and sellers are so afraid of? Well, they're afraid of making a wrong decision. See, that buyer's afraid if they go ahead and buy that property, there might be a better one that comes along. That seller's afraid if they list with you, there might be an agent that comes along and can get them more money. So they're afraid of making a wrong decision. And what's the only way they can keep from making the wrong decision? It's to make no decision. So then we send in you, the highly trained real estate professional, but you have fear too. You're afraid of being perceived as a pushy salesperson, or you're afraid of rejection. So now we got a buyer who's afraid to buy, a seller's afraid to sell, and an agent that's afraid to help them. Folks, the biggest misconception in real estate is that buyers and sellers know exactly what it is they want and what'll make them happy. Fear is one of the biggest demotivators. And we have to understand that our job is to work with people and to help them move through that fear and to help them find out exactly what it is that they want and exactly what it is that they need. So how do we help them reduce the fear? By focusing on the motivation. What's motivating that buyer to buy? What's motivating that seller to sell? Folks, 70% of the appointments we have with buyers and sellers end with no effort on our part to bring that to a successful conclusion. So to be successful, you must have a plan of action that you put into place with each prospect. So we have to have questions that we ask in order to determine what the need is that we need to satisfy in order to have a successful sale and collect that commission. So our first thing we need to do to be an effective salesperson is to always take control by asking questions, right? We want to use information gathering questions. Who, what, when, where, how. Things that are going to help us gather information that we're going to use to help the prospect. We're going to use alternative choice questions, right? We're going to use questions. I'm showing the buyer the property and I'll say, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, would this bedroom here be Jimmy's bedroom or Mary's bedroom? Right? I use alternative choice questions. I use the tie-down question, right? Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you are interested in getting the most money for this property, aren't you? See, folks, I'm going to use questions in order to help me gather information and move the buyers and sellers successfully through the process. Sometimes I'll use what's called a porcupine question. That's a question I'll use to kind of throw a question back to a buyer or seller. Maybe the buyer says to me, well, Bill, do the appliances stay with this house? And I'll respond with a porcupine. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, would you be interested in owning this property if the appliances were included? And folks, when you're asking questions, don't be afraid to ask one of the most important questions, which is why? I'm with a couple and they have one child and they want a 4-bedroom property. Why? See, I frequently need to ask that why question to drill down to the motivation so that I can really find out how I'm going to satisfy that need. Now, one of the things I want you to get used to using is what we call closing techniques. And people are afraid whenever I say closing techniques because they think it's something we're going to use to get people to do something they don't want to do. Folks, that's not what closing is. Closing is a process of using questions to help the prospect make a decision that we know is going to benefit them, but they might not make without our help. So I'm going to use closing questions in order to help move them through the process. See, I believe that if you would just increase your attempts and competency by a mere 25%, you'll actually increase your earnings by 100%. Now, the question is, when do I close? Well, the answer is always. See, I start closing with the buyer right from the beginning. I talk to a buyer on the phone and I'll say, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, when you come in today, don't forget your checkbook. See, that's a form of a close. I'm using it to move them through the process. Now, why do I use closing techniques? I use them to confirm a decision. I use them to cause action. Or I use them to get an objection. Some people think objections are bad. I think they're great. See, I believe if there's no objection, then there's no interest. So you've got to get out there and you've got to use the right techniques to get people to move forward or to give you an objection that gives you direction. Now, I use a lot of minor closes because they eliminate the need for a major close. What's a minor close? Well, if I'm on a listing appointment with a seller, I may say to the seller, well, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I'd like to get your open house schedule. Should I plan on it this weekend or would next weekend be better? See, that's a minor close. Either one that they choose means they've already decided on the major close, which is they're going to go forward and allow me to go to work for them. I like to use other closes that help me. If I'm with a buyer, I may say to them, well, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, why don't we do this? Why don't we see how it looks on paper? I may use the sliding scale. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being you love this house and want to move in today, and 5 being you hate it and want to run away, where would you say you are on that scale right now? If I did a good job, most of the time it'll be a 7 or 8, and my follow-up question will be, what would it take to get you to 10? I've got to use the impending doom close, right? That's where I explain to the people that if they don't go forward, they stand to lose out. You know, the fear of loss is a better motivator than the benefit of gain. I've got to use the feel, felt, found close, right? That's where I explain to the people, I understand how you feel. I worked with a nice couple last week who felt the same way, and when they moved forward, this is what they found. I can use the Ben Franklin close. That's where I have a buyer or a seller who's sitting on a fence and they can't decide, gee, should I or shouldn't I? And I explain to them, old Ben Franklin, one of the wisest men in American history, when he was faced with a tough decision, what he would do is draw a line down the middle of a piece of paper, write should on one side, write should on the other side, and let's make a list of all the reasons why you should own this house and then all the reasons why you shouldn't. That's a great one to get those fence sitters because I discovered frequently the true objection that they never gave me will come out on the paper. Now, while we're talking about objections, folks, what is an objection? It's not something bad. It's a request for more information. It's an expression of interest. It's a buying, a selling signal, or it's a directional arrow. What you've got to do is learn how to handle these objections and not be afraid of them. See, I have a simple process. It works like this. When you get an objection, the first thing you do is you cushion it. I understand, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, this is an important decision and I'm sure you want to make the right decision. Then I clarify it, just to make sure I've given you all the information you need to make the right decision. What is it you feel you need to think about? Then I isolate it. So Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, if I understand you correctly, the only thing standing in the way of you owning this property is your concern about the asking price. Now, if I can't isolate it, if they won't give me a specific objection, I'll use the what is it. I'll list all the things it could possibly be. The price, the neighborhood, the condition, the floor plan. And if I still can't get the objection from them, I'll make them squeak, which is I'll say to them, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, are you afraid to move forward here because you're afraid you might be making the wrong decision? See, folks, sometimes you got to make them squeak and say just exactly what you believe it is. But once I've cushioned it, clarified it, isolated it, now I'm prepared to handle it. So that is the right way to handle the objection. Now, folks, remember, professional selling is simple. It's just a matter of working with your buyers and sellers to find out what their need is and then developing a plan to help them satisfy the need. So that's all the time I got for today. I hope that you'll use these techniques to go out there and be a more effective salesperson and get more of your buyers and sellers to say yes so that you can put more commission dollars in your pocket because you deserve it for all the hard work you're doing. This is Bill Field saying thanks for joining me. I look forward to being with you for our next video training tip.